Tonight, we're stepping into a story that was never meant to leave the cutting room floor. During filming of Expedition Bigfoot, lead investigator Mireya Mayor reportedly captured footage so disturbing that production was halted almost overnight. Memory cards were confiscated, files were locked down, and what was supposed to be just another night in the field turned into a silence that still hasn't been explained. Officially, the network called it a creative pause. Unofficially, insiders describe something far more serious: outside intervention, erased data, and a scientist who suddenly stopped speaking publicly. This isn't just about Bigfoot, and it isn't just about a TV show. It's about what happens when evidence crosses a line someone else has already drawn. Before we break down what was filmed, what vanished, and why this case may never be revisited on television, make sure you're subscribed, because once you hear how deep this goes, you'll understand why this story didn't disappear by accident. What happened during that Expedition Bigfoot shoot didn't begin with panic or chaos. It began quietly, the way most serious investigations do. Late at night, minimal movement, a sense that something was off long before anyone could explain why. The team had worked this terrain before: dense forest, uneven ground, heavy canopy. But that night felt different. Even experienced crew members commented on how the sound seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Mireya Mayor was leading one of the units, focused, methodical, treating the night like any other data collection operation. Shortly after midnight, thermal readings began showing irregular movement patterns near the tree line. Not random heat signatures, not animals drifting in and out of range. These readings were deliberate: appearing, stopping, repositioning. Mireya initially assumed equipment interference or overlapping wildlife movement, but the patterns didn't match anything in her field experience. When the drone camera was adjusted and locked onto the clearing, the feed briefly stabilized, and then everyone froze. On screen was a tall, upright figure moving with balance and intent, not running, not charging, walking. Its heat signature was unusually intense, brighter than surrounding wildlife, yet oddly controlled. The figure paused near the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by trees, and turned its head toward the drone. That moment lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Enough for silence to fall across the monitoring tent. Enough for someone to whisper, "That's not supposed to be there." Then the feed dropped. No warning, no gradual signal loss. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. Static replaced video. Audio spiked, then cut entirely. When the systems rebooted, timestamps had jumped forward several minutes. No one remembered giving commands. No one recalled moving. The gap couldn't be explained. Mireya immediately ordered all local backups secured. She wanted the data preserved before anyone could touch it. That's when the first red flag appeared. The drone's onboard storage still held fragments of the encounter. Incomplete, distorted, but undeniably real. Enough to confirm the figure wasn't a visual artifact or misread thermal bloom. Within hours before sunrise, production leadership was contacted by higher-level executives. By midday, the tone had changed completely. What had started as a routine expedition was now being treated as a liability, not because it was fake, but because it wasn't. By morning, the atmosphere around the expedition had changed completely. What should have been a routine data review turned into closed-door conversations and unanswered questions. Mireya expected scientific scrutiny, verification. What she didn't expect was silence. Calls went unreturned. Messages were acknowledged without answers. And when production leadership finally spoke, it wasn't about the footage itself. It was about procedure. The first instruction came quietly: halt all filming until further notice. No explanation, no timeline, just stop. Equipment was powered down, drones grounded, and memory cards cataloged for temporary review. Mireya pushed back, insisting that any biological anomaly fell under her scientific jurisdiction. The response was short and unsettling. This was no longer an editorial decision. It was administrative. Less than 24 hours later, unfamiliar personnel arrived at the field base. They didn't wear network branding. They didn't introduce themselves as producers. They carried hard cases, clipboards, and spoke in precise, rehearsed language. Their request wasn't framed as optional. All recording media was to be surrendered immediately: drones, camera cards, audio logs, even personal backups. One crew member later said it felt less like a production pause and more like a controlled sweep. Mireya objected openly. She demanded to know who authorized the confiscation and where the data would be taken. one of the men responded without raising his voice. "This material is no longer cleared for broadcast or independent analysis." That sentence ended the discussion. From that moment on, nothing belonged to the team. By that evening, digital access began disappearing. Cloud folders were locked, editing systems flagged errors. An audio engineer reported his laptop rebooting mid-session, returning with files missing and permissions revoked. Another crew member noticed timestamps altered on backups they hadn't touched. The data wasn't just being collected, it was being rewritten. Officially, the network would later describe the shutdown as a technical issue paired with creative reassessment, but those on site knew better. You don't erase footage this aggressively unless someone is afraid of what it shows. And as Mireya stood in a clearing that was now silent again, one truth became impossible to ignore. The investigation hadn't ended. It had been taken over. For a brief window of time, everyone believed the evidence was gone for good. The confiscated drives, the wiped systems, the locked folders, it all seemed airtight. Whatever had been captured that night had been swallowed by corporate silence. And yet, something survived. Not a full video. Not a clean backup, just a fragment that wasn't supposed to be there at all. Days after the shutdown, a former assistant editor, someone low enough in the hierarchy to be overlooked, discovered a cached still frame buried deep inside a temporary render folder. It hadn't been flagged, hadn't been encrypted, and hadn't been scrubbed during the purge. One single image, automatically generated during a background process before access was revoked. A digital ghost. The frame showed a clearing choked with fog, trees barely visible at the edges. In the center stood a tall, upright shape. Its proportions were wrong in a way that was immediately unsettling. The shoulders were too wide. The arms hung too long. The head sloped back at an angle that didn't match human anatomy, yet the stance was unmistakably bipedal. It wasn't caught mid-run or mid-attack. It was standing still, watching. What disturbed those who saw it most wasn't the shape itself. It was the posture. The figure wasn't reacting to the camera. It wasn't startled. Its head was slightly tilted, as if assessing the equipment observing it. As if it understood it was being watched and had chosen not to hide. The editor shared the frame privately with two trusted colleagues. Within hours, it had been copied, renamed, and passed along through encrypted messages. Then something strange happened. The file began disappearing from devices without being deleted. One recipient swore it vanished while he was looking at it. Another found the file name still present, but the data inside reduced to 0 bytes. It was as if the image was being hunted. When the frame briefly surfaced on a closed research forum, it lasted less than 10 minutes before being taken down by an automated copyright claim filed by a company no one recognized. Not the network, not the production company, a third party, one registered to a Virginia address tied to defense contracting offices. That was when the whispers changed. This wasn't damage control. This wasn't embarrassment. This was containment. And the single surviving frame became proof that what Mireya's team encountered wasn't a mistake. It was something, someone else already knew existed. After the frame vanished, attention quietly shifted to one person, Mireya Mayor herself. Not publicly, not in headlines, but behind closed doors. Interviews she had already agreed to were suddenly canceled. Academic appearances were postponed without explanation. Even colleagues who had known her for years noticed something was wrong. She stopped answering messages. Calls went to voicemail. Emails received polite, delayed replies that said nothing at all. To the public, it looked like a routine break. To those close to her, it felt forced. One production assistant later recalled that Mireya had confided in him days after the shutdown. She said she'd been warned, not threatened directly, but advised, that discussing the footage could have serious consequences. Not professional consequences, legal ones, national ones. She was told the material fell outside normal scientific discovery and into a category she wasn't authorized to address. When she asked who made that determination, she was given no names, only an instruction: stop. Things escalated quickly. A scheduled university lecture on undiscovered primates was abruptly pulled from the calendar hours before it was set to begin. Event staff said 2 men had arrived early, requesting a private conversation with her. Witnesses described Mireya leaving the building with them, visibly shaken. The lecture never happened. No explanation was given. When she finally reappeared publicly, it was in a short, heavily edited network video. Calm lighting, neutral background, controlled tone. She stated that no verifiable evidence had been found and that the investigation had yielded inconclusive results. Viewers immediately noticed how unlike her it felt. Her cadence was stiff. Her eyes drifted off camera repeatedly. Audio specialists later noted faint compression artifacts suggesting the video had been altered before release. Behind the scenes, crew members said she was furious, not afraid. She believed the footage represented a genuine biological anomaly and deserved scientific review. But every path forward was blocked. Journals wouldn't respond. Conferences declined submissions. Even private discussions seemed to disappear before they started. The message was clear without being spoken. Mireya could continue her career, as long as she pretended that night never happened, and the fact that a respected scientist was silenced so efficiently told everyone else something terrifying. Whatever had stepped into that clearing wasn't just unknown, it was protected. After Mireya Mayor's silence became impossible to ignore, the rest of the Expedition Bigfoot team began to notice changes that went far beyond a canceled shoot. It wasn't just the footage that disappeared. The paper trail vanished with it. Call logs were missing. Emails referencing the incident returned error messages. Even internal production documents were quietly rewritten, removing entire dates from the schedule as if that expedition had never occurred. Crew members who tried to talk about the incident informally were warned to stop asking questions, not by executives they recognized, but by legal representatives they'd never interacted with before. New non-disclosure agreements were issued far stricter than anything previously signed. These didn't just restrict discussion of unaired content, they prohibited referencing field anomalies, third-party intervention, and external oversight. Language that had no place in a normal television contract. Then the personal incident started. One cameraman reported a break-in at his home. Nothing valuable was taken. No electronics, no cash. The only thing missing was a small external hard drive he used for off-site backups. A sound engineer received a late-night call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end didn't threaten him. It simply said, "You already gave us what we needed," and hung up. Another crew member claimed his editing laptop locked itself during a routine session, displaying a message that read, "Access revoked by administrator." At first, some tried to explain it away as paranoia, stress, coincidence, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Everyone affected had been present during the night of the encounter. Everyone else was left alone. A small group of crew members decided to quietly compare notes, not over email, not over phones, in person. They met in a motel outside Portland under the excuse of a production debrief. What they discovered confirmed their worst fear. They weren't dealing with a network cleanup. They were dealing with coordinated suppression. Fragments of data still existed. Corrupted audio logs, partial telemetry, thermal readings that showed multiple large heat signatures circling the camp hours before the sighting. These weren't random movements. They flanked the team, advanced, with intent. That was the moment the crew understood the truth. Expedition Bigfoot hadn't crossed into dangerous territory by accident. They had walked into something that already had watchers, and those watchers were now watching them. When the remaining crew quietly began comparing what little data they still had, a disturbing picture started to form. This wasn't just about a single figure caught on thermal for a few seconds. The encounter was only the most visible moment in a pattern that had been building long before that night. Recovered telemetry from the drone showed repeated signal interference beginning hours earlier, not random static, not environmental noise. The interference appeared in timed bursts, always lasting the same duration, always occurring when the drone crossed specific points in the airspace. When one technician overlaid those interference points on a topographical map, something chilling emerged. The disruptions formed a loose perimeter around the team's camp, almost like a boundary. Thermal logs painted an even stranger picture. Multiple heat signatures appeared intermittently around the perimeter throughout the night. They didn't behave like animals. They didn't roam. They didn't chase prey. They moved in short, controlled paths, stopping and starting as if reacting to something unseen. At one point, 3 signatures converged near the tree line, merged into a single heat mass, then separated again minutes later. No known wildlife pattern matched that behavior. Audio fragments recovered from corrupted files revealed low-frequency pulses embedded beneath normal ambient sound. Most viewers would never notice them, but when isolated and slowed down, the pulses followed a precise rhythm. Every 13 seconds, repeating, consistent. Audio engineers noted that the frequency range didn't align with wind, insects, machinery, or known animal calls. It also didn't behave like random interference. It behaved like signaling. One technician made a connection that stopped the room cold. The pulse interval matched communication timing used in certain long-range tracking systems. Not civilian, military, experimental. That didn't mean the sound was man-made, but it suggested something operating with structure, not instinct. Even more unsettling was what happened when the team tried to reprocess the data. Files that should have been recoverable degraded further each time they were open, as if repeated access caused decay. One engineer described it as the data-resisting analysis. Whether that was a technical anomaly or something else, no one could say. By the end of that meeting, the crew reached an unspoken agreement. The footage wasn't erased because it was confusing. It was erased because it was coherent. It showed intent, awareness, and coordination. And whatever they encountered wasn't reacting like an animal being discovered. It was reacting like something that already knew it was being observed and allowed itself to be seen. By the time the crew finished assembling what little data remained, one reality had become impossible to ignore. There was no safe way forward. Not scientifically, not legally, and not personally. Whatever Expedition Bigfoot had stumbled into wasn't something that could be revisited, debated, or slowly unpacked over future seasons. The cost of continuing had already become clear. Attempts to escalate the findings through proper scientific channels quietly failed. Emails to research institutions went unanswered. Informal conversations with colleagues ended abruptly once the topic was raised. One crew member later admitted that a longtime academic contact warned him off record to stop pursuing the material entirely. This isn't a discovery, he was told. It's a boundary. At the network level, the shift was just as stark. Show outlines that once encouraged deeper investigation were rewritten to remove anything resembling direct encounters. Language was softened. Stakes were reduced. The emphasis moved away from evidence and toward atmosphere, not because the producers wanted it that way, but because that was the only version still allowed to exist. Privately, some team members discussed walking away altogether. They had families, careers, lives that suddenly felt exposed. The realization that unknown parties could access personal devices, track movements, and erase data without explanation changed how everyone viewed their role. This wasn't about fear of ridicule, it was fear of attention. The most telling moment came when one crew member asked a simple question during a closed production call. If this isn't real, why are we being treated like it is? No one answered. The truth was never officially denied. It was simply made unreachable. And so the investigation didn't end with a conclusion. It ended with containment. The show continued, but the story didn't. Viewers never saw the moment that changed everything. Never heard the sounds buried beneath the audio. Never saw the frame that shouldn't exist. All that remained was absence, a gap in the narrative that felt heavier than any on-screen reveal. By choosing silence, the people in control made one thing clear. Whatever stepped into that clearing wasn't meant to be studied publicly. And the most unsettling possibility wasn't that it existed. It was that someone already knew it did. Long after filming stopped and the crew scattered, one question refused to die. Why Mireya Mayor? Of all the people involved, she was the one with the strongest scientific footing, the one most capable of contextualizing what had been seen. And yet, she was also the one who went silent the fastest. That silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. In private conversations with colleagues before cutting off contact, Mireya reportedly made one statement that never left the people who heard it. She didn't say they had found Bigfoot. She didn't say they had found a new species. She said, "What we saw doesn't fit the tree." In biology, the tree is everything. Taxonomy, evolution, lineage. If something doesn't fit, it means it didn't branch naturally from what came before. It means the framework breaks. That idea explains the reaction better than any cover story. A misidentified animal could be debated. A hoax could be dismissed. But something that behaves with coordination, signaling, awareness of surveillance, and physical traits that don't align with known evolutionary paths, that isn't folklore. That's a problem. Mireya understood that going public without absolute control of the narrative would invite ridicule at best and career destruction at worst. But what seemed to stop her wasn't fear of backlash. It was the realization that the evidence didn't belong to science anymore. Once federal contractors appeared, once data was seized under administrative authority, the matter shifted domains, from research to security, from curiosity to containment. One former associate claimed Mireya was offered a choice: continue her work, access funding, maintain credibility, or challenge the decision and lose everything. She chose survival, not silence. There's a difference. Silence implies consent. Survival implies pressure. In the months that followed, she redirected her focus to safer, established research. Publicly, she moved on. Privately, she stopped fieldwork involving remote forests entirely. She never corrected the official explanation, but she never fully endorsed it either. Sometimes, the loudest warning isn't spoken. It's when someone who spent their life chasing the unknown suddenly decides there are things that should not be followed again. Years have passed, but the absence left by that night still lingers. The missing footage was never recovered, the encounter was never acknowledged, and Expedition Bigfoot quietly moved on without ever explaining what changed. But silence doesn't erase impact. It preserves it. What makes this case unsettling isn't just the possibility that something unknown was filmed. It's the response, the speed, the precision, the authority with which evidence was removed and people were silenced. Those actions don't follow curiosity. They follow familiarity. If what Mireya Mayor's team encountered was harmless, it wouldn't require containment. If it was imaginary, it wouldn't demand erasure. And if it was misunderstood wildlife, it wouldn't trigger outside intervention at all. The most disturbing possibility is also the simplest. Whatever stepped into that clearing had been seen before, documented before, studied before, and carefully kept out of public reach. And that leaves one final question. Not about Bigfoot, not about television, but about us. If something like this can be hidden so completely, how much else have we already been taught not to see?
Just minutes ago, reports surfaced that Bryce Johnson, a central figure on Expedition Bigfoot, has been hospitalized. No official explanation, no clear timeline. Just a sudden halt in activity and an unusual silence from those closest to the situation. This didn't follow the pattern of a routine injury or exhaustion. It happened quietly, behind the scenes, after recent fieldwork in some of the most remote and punishing locations the show has ever explored. As questions spread faster than answers, one thing became clear. Something went wrong. And whatever it was, no one seems ready to talk about it yet. The first sign that something was wrong didn't come from a press release or an announcement. It came from absence. Bryce Johnson is known for consistency, scheduled appearances, active communication, steady involvement in ongoing projects. Then, without warning, that pattern broke. Planned engagements were quietly removed. Travel plans were halted. Communications that were normally routine simply stopped. At first, it didn't raise alarms. People close to the production are used to long gaps. Remote field work often means delayed updates, but this time felt different. The silence wasn't explained. It wasn't acknowledged. It just appeared. Within hours, quiet adjustments were being made behind the scenes. Internal schedules were paused. Coordination emails stopped mid-thread. One crew member, speaking cautiously, later described it as an abrupt "stand down," a phrase typically reserved for situations where something has gone seriously off course. What made this moment unsettling wasn't panic, it was control. Information didn't leak the way it usually does. There were no offhand comments, no vague reassurances, no "everything's fine" placeholders. Instead, there was a tightening, fewer people involved, fewer details shared, a noticeable shift from openness to containment. Viewers noticed it too. Fans who track the show closely began asking questions when expected updates never arrived. Social channels went quiet. Mentions were avoided rather than addressed. Even neutral acknowledgments were missing. That's when the word "hospitalized" began circulating. Not publicly at first, but quietly, through secondary sources and industry whispers. No details, no context, just the implication that whatever happened required immediate medical attention and a level of seriousness that couldn't be brushed aside. Crucially, no one rushed to clarify it. In situations like this, production teams usually move fast to calm speculation. A short statement, a simple explanation, anything to reassure the audience. But that didn't happen here, and the longer the silence stretched, the more it suggested that answers weren't being withheld for dramatic effect, but because they weren't settled yet. This wasn't a public emergency. It was a private one, and that distinction matters, because when activity stops this suddenly, without explanation, it usually means the people involved are still trying to understand exactly what they're dealing with themselves. Whatever happened to Bryce Johnson didn't unfold on camera. It didn't come with a clear narrative or a prepared response. It interrupted everything mid-motion. And that interruption is where this story truly begins. As concern grew, attention turned to Bryce Johnson's last confirmed movements. Not rumors, not online speculation, just what could be reliably traced. And once that timeline was laid out, it raised more questions than it answered. In the days leading up to the incident, Bryce was actively involved in field operations connected to Expedition Bigfoot. These weren't brief shoots or controlled environments. They were extended deployments in remote terrain, areas chosen specifically specifically because of isolation, limited access, and low human presence. In places like that, help isn't minutes away. Extraction itself becomes a challenge. Those familiar with the production describe the workload as intense but familiar. Long nights, disrupted sleep cycles, cold exposure, uneven ground, physical strain layered on top of mental fatigue. None of that is unusual for the show. Bryce has handled these conditions many times before without issue. That's what makes this situation stand out. By all outward signs, Bryce completed the final field window without interruption. He wasn't pulled early. He wasn't sidelined mid-operation. There were no public signs of injury, illness, or distress. No visible incident that would explain an immediate medical emergency. Then the timeline stops. At a very specific point, scheduled travel was canceled. Follow-up coordination halted. Communication chains went quiet. Not delayed, ended. People who expected routine post-field updates never received them. That abrupt cutoff matters. It suggests whatever occurred did not develop slowly. It wasn't a condition that worsened over days with warning signs others could observe. It appears to have escalated fast enough to override standard procedures. Another detail complicates things further. Bryce is experienced in managing physical limits under pressure. For someone with that background to require hospitalization suggests this wasn't a simple case of exhaustion or discomfort. What exactly changed during that final stretch remains unclear, but when a timeline breaks this cleanly, it usually means the event behind it didn't allow time for gradual response. It forced an immediate one, and that unanswered gap between everything normal and everything stop is where the most unsettling questions now sit. To understand why Bryce Johnson's hospitalization caused such immediate concern, it's important to look at the environment he was operating in. One viewers never fully see. Expedition Bigfoot doesn't film under controlled conditions. It functions inside high-pressure field windows where time, weather, and logistics dictate everything. These investigations are built around sustained stress. Night operations disrupt natural sleep cycles. Physical exertion stacks day after day. Cold, damp terrain taxes the body in ways that don't always register immediately. Meals are rushed. Hydration becomes inconsistent. Recovery is often postponed in favor of momentum. What makes this significant is Bryce's role within that system. He isn't just another participant. He's expected to remain steady, capable, and reliable no matter the conditions. People in that position tend to internalize strain rather than broadcast it. Warning signs are minimized. Discomfort becomes background noise. Crews familiar with long-term field production describe an unspoken culture. You push through unless something is clearly wrong. Minor symptoms are ignored. Fatigue is normalized. Everyone assumes they'll recover once the window closes. But sometimes, the body doesn't wait. What unsettled those close to the situation wasn't just that Bryce needed medical attention, it was how fast everything changed. In routine health issues, productions adapt. Someone steps back. Schedules shift. Explanations circulate internally. That didn't happen here. Instead, operations stopped abruptly. Communication narrowed. Decisions were handled by a small circle. That kind of response usually means uncertainty, not just about severity, but about cause. Production teams are trained to handle accidents. What they struggle with are situations that don't fit known patterns, when symptoms don't align cleanly, when timelines don't explain themselves. And that's where this becomes disturbing, because this wasn't treated like a known risk being managed. It was treated like something unexpected, something that forced everyone involved to pause and reassess before moving forward. When people accustomed to operating under constant pressure decide to stop completely, it's usually because that pressure crossed a line no one anticipated. What pushed concern into something darker wasn't just the hospitalization itself, it was how it was handled. When someone connected to a production experiences a routine medical issue, there's usually a familiar pattern. A brief delay, a vague update, A line about precautionary care, enough information to steady nerves without exposing details. That pattern didn't appear here. Instead, the response was immediate and unusually contained. Bryce wasn't treated locally and released. He wasn't cleared with a short observation window. Medical transport was escalated quickly, and access narrowed just as fast. People who would normally be informed weren't. Even internal updates became limited, carefully worded, and infrequent. That raised quiet alarm bells. Medical professionals familiar with field operations note that this kind of response usually signals uncertainty, not panic, but caution. Situations where doctors don't yet know what they're dealing with, or where symptoms don't point cleanly in one direction. In those cases, the priority becomes monitoring, isolation, and time. Another detail stood out. No one rushed to label the situation. There was no mention of injury, no reference to dehydration, exhaustion, or exposure. Even general categories were avoided. That absence is telling. When a condition is understood, even broadly, it's usually named. When it isn't, silence becomes the safest option. Meanwhile, production didn't resume around the situation. It didn't adapt, it stopped. That suggests the hospitalization wasn't seen as a side event. It was central enough to affect everything else. People close to the situation describe a waiting period, not a countdown to recovery, but a pause while information came in. Tests, observations, follow-ups, the kind of process that doesn't resolve in hours. What unsettled observers most was how carefully the situation was being protected from speculation. Not denied, not clarified, just held. That's not how minor incidents are handled. It's how situations are managed, when outcomes aren't yet clear, and saying the wrong thing could cause more harm than saying nothing at all. At this point, the concern wasn't about what had already happened. It was about what doctors were still trying to rule out. By this point, the question wasn't just what happened to Bryce Johnson. It was why this situation felt fundamentally different from every other onset injury or health scare people could remember. Productions like Expedition Bigfoot have dealt with sprains, infections, exhaustion, even emergency evacuations before. Those incidents followed a recognizable rhythm. This one didn't. Normally, when something goes wrong, information leaks fast. Not maliciously, but organically. Someone mentions a heat issue. Someone else confirms it was precautionary. The story stabilizes. That never happened here. Instead, the narrative fractured. Small pieces surfaced, but they didn't connect. Each new detail raised more questions than it answered. Another difference was the speed of escalation. There was no visible intermediate stage, no public moment of concern followed by action. It went from normal operations to full stop almost overnight. That kind of jump suggests the problem wasn't something building gradually in plain sight. It suggests a turning point, an event or realization that forced an immediate change in posture. People who've worked in high-risk field environments point out that when leadership is affected, the response is magnified. Bryce isn't just a participant. He's a stabilizing presence. If he's sidelined, everything else becomes uncertain. But even accounting for that, the degree of containment here stood out. Then there's the language that wasn't used. No reassurance, no timeline, no framing of recovery. Even neutral phrases like "out of an abundance of caution" were absent. That omission carries weight. It implies no one was ready to predict what came next. This wasn't handled like an incident with a clear path forward. It was handled like an open question. And that's what unsettled those paying close attention. The sense that the situation was still unfolding, still being assessed, and not yet safe to explain. In environments built around certainty and control, ambiguity is the most uncomfortable state of all. At this stage, concern shifted from curiosity to something heavier. Not fear, but vigilance. Because when experienced teams slow everything down this deliberately, it's usually because the unknown is more dangerous than the known. And whatever caused Bryce Johnson's hospitalization hadn't finished revealing itself yet. As days passed, another detail became impossible to ignore. The people closest to Bryce Johnson went quiet, not just publicly, but almost entirely. Cast members who normally interact freely with fans posted nothing. Production channels stayed inactive. Even indirect acknowledgments were noticeably absent. This wasn't normal. In most situations, someone eventually breaks the silence. A a short message, a supportive comment, a reassurance that things are under control. Here, that never came. Instead, there was restraint, careful distance, the kind of silence that suggests coordination rather than coincidence. Those familiar with production environments recognize this pattern. When something is still being evaluated, medically, legally, or operationally, communication tightens. Not because people don't care, but because saying the wrong thing too early can create problems that can't be undone. What made this especially unsettling was how unified the silence appeared. No conflicting messages, no accidental disclosures, no emotional posts made in haste. Everyone seemed to understand, without being told publicly, that this was not the moment to speak. Behind the scenes, this kind of quiet usually means one thing: people are waiting. Waiting on test results, waiting on clear answers, waiting to know whether a situation is resolving or changing. Another detail stood out. Production didn't begin pivoting around Bryce's absence. There were no announcements about schedule adjustments or replacements, no attempts to normalize the interruption. Everything stayed frozen, as if the outcome of one situation would determine what happened next for everyone else. That kind of pause is rare. It suggests that Bryce's condition wasn't being treated as an isolated issue, but as something with broader implications, something that needed clarity before any forward movement could safely occur. For viewers, silence often feels frustrating, but for professionals, silence is sometimes the loudest signal of all. It means uncertainty still outweighs confidence. It means decisions haven't been finalized. And most importantly, it means the story isn't finished yet. At this point, the absence of information wasn't calming nerves. It was sharpening them. Because when an entire team chooses not to speak, it's usually because they don't yet know which version of the truth they'll be allowed or able to share. As silence stretched on, speculation rushed in to fill the void. Online forums, comment sections, and private messages began circulating theory, some mild, some extreme. But what stood out wasn't the rumors themselves. It was how firmly no one close to the situation engaged with them. Usually, false narratives are corrected quickly. Even a vague denial can shut down dangerous speculation. That didn't happen here. Instead, the response was consistent, non-response. No clarifications, no course corrections, just a firm boundary that no one appeared willing to cross. This matters because professionals don't ignore misinformation unless there's a reason. And often, that reason is uncertainty. When facts are still being established, addressing speculation can lock people into statements they may later need to walk back. People familiar with crisis communication note that this kind of restraint often accompanies internal restrictions, legal considerations, medical privacy, contractual obligation, or active review processes, where information is still considered provisional. Another unsettling factor was the absence of even supportive language. No thoughts are with him. No hoping for a quick recovery. Those messages are common, even when details are limited. Their absence suggests that outcomes were still being evaluated and that optimism at that stage may have been premature. Meanwhile, fan speculation escalated precisely because there was nothing to anchor it. Each unanswered question created space for another theory. But through it all, one thing remained consistent. The people who actually knew more said nothing. That silence doesn't confirm anything sinister, but it does indicate that the situation hadn't reached a stable point. And in high-profile environments, stability is usually the threshold for communication. Until that threshold is reached, rumors remain rumors, but the refusal to engage with them tells its own story. It suggests the line between what's known and what's still unfolding hadn't been drawn yet. And when that line hasn't been drawn, it's often because the picture isn't complete. At this stage, the most disturbing element wasn't any single theory. It was the fact that no one was ready to say which theories were wrong. As the situation surrounding Bryce Johnson remained unresolved, attention shifted from what had happened to what might follow. Not just for him, but for everyone connected to Expedition Bigfoot. Incidents like this don't exist in isolation. They ripple outward, forcing difficult conversations behind closed doors. If the hospitalization was linked in any way to field conditions, it raises immediate questions about risk thresholds. How far can investigations push into remote, high-stress environments before the danger outweighs the the discovery? And who decides when that line has been crossed? Production teams are built around contingency plans, but they rely on predictability. What unsettles professionals most is the unknown, situations that don't fit established categories. When that happens, protocols are re-evaluated, sometimes rewritten entirely. Another implication lies in timing. If updates are delayed until clarity is achieved, it suggests that whatever doctors are monitoring hasn't resolved cleanly. Recovery timelines aren't being shared because they aren't certain yet. That uncertainty affects scheduling, future field work, and even how upcoming episodes are framed. There's also the human cost. High-risk research environments demand trust. Trust that safety measures work. Trust that limits are respected. When something disrupts that trust, even temporarily, it leaves a mark. People begin asking quieter questions, not about ratings or storylines, but about sustainability. For viewers, the lack of closure feels unsettling. For those involved, it's heavier, because moving forward without understanding what went wrong risks repeating it. At this point, whatever happened has already changed the trajectory of the investigation. The only question left is how much. As of now, there is still no complete explanation for what led to Bryce Johnson's hospitalization. No clear cause, no confirmed timeline of recovery, just a careful, ongoing wait for answers that haven't been made public yet. What makes this moment linger isn't fear, it's uncertainty. The situation hasn't been closed. It hasn't been summarized. It hasn't been packaged into a narrative people can easily understand. And until it is, concern remains. For those watching from the outside, the instinct is to demand clarity. But in situations like this, clarity doesn't come on a schedule. It arrives only when enough is known to speak responsibly. Anything earlier risks doing more harm than good. What's clear is that this wasn't treated as a routine setback. It interrupted operations, reshaped plans, and placed everything else on hold. That alone signals its importance. There are still questions no one is answering publicly. Was this a medical issue that developed suddenly? Was it connected to prolonged exposure or accumulated strain? Or was it something entirely unrelated that simply happened at the worst possible moment? Until those questions are resolved, speculation will continue. But speculation isn't the point. The point is that something unexpected happened to someone deeply experienced in extreme conditions, and it forced everyone involved to stop and reassess. Sometimes the most disturbing stories aren't the ones filled with dramatic revelations. They're the ones still unfolding quietly, where the absence of information speaks louder than any statement could. And until that silence breaks, this story remains open. The Expedition Bigfoot team captured the clearest footage in the show's history, a figure moving through the forest with speed, size, and intent no known animal can match. The clip shocked the crew, forced production to halt, and left investigators shaken. Before we break down what really happened, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what the network hasn't aired yet. It started as a routine sweep, nothing unusual, nothing the Expedition Bigfoot crew hadn't done 100 times before. The team split into two groups, with Bryce monitoring sensors from the tech hub, while Russell and Mireya moved along a narrow ridge dense with fir trees and thick underbrush. Earlier in the day, the drone operator picked up a strange thermal hit, too tall, too wide, and moving too smoothly to be a bear. But the image was distorted, and the team dismissed it as atmospheric interference. No one knew that the same figure would return after dark, and this time it would step into view. Just after 11 p.m., the woods fell silent. Not quieter, silent. Birds stopped calling. Crickets cut off mid-chirp. Even the wind died. Russell whispered into his mic that the air felt charged, the same way lightning builds before a storm. Then, a seismic sensor, placed earlier to track large animal movement, triggered 3 consecutive alerts. Each impact hit harder than the last, spaced in a pattern that suggested deliberate steps. Heavy, slow, calculated. The data coming into Bryce's monitor showed weight far above any known wildlife in the region. Russell signaled the drone pilot to reposition the infrared unit overhead. The drone adjusted, scanning between trees, catching only faint movement. Branches shifting, leaves trembling, but no visible source. Mireya reported feeling watched, her voice tightening as she scanned the tree line with night vision. On a second monitor, Bryce saw something new, a shape breaking the thermal line. Not a blob, not a glitch, a form, upright, broad, moving with intent. Then it happened. Between two trees roughly 40 yards from Russell's position, something stepped forward. The camera caught it, fully, cleanly, unmistakably. A massive silhouette, shoulders impossibly wide, head high above the brush line. It moved with a smoothness no heavy animal should have. And then, as if realizing it had been seen, the figure froze. The camera recorded every second. This wasn't another blur. This wasn't a heat distortion. For the first time, the Expedition Bigfoot crew had captured clear footage of something alive and terrifyingly real. Back at the mobile command unit, Bryce Johnson replayed the clip again and again, each time hoping the figure would resolve into something familiar. An elk rising on its hind legs, a hunter caught in night vision, even a bear brushing against a tree. But the more he zoomed in, the more impossible the footage became. The outline was precise, shoulders too squared for any quadruped, arms noticeably long, nearly reaching to the knees. The stride length measured at almost 4 feet. No animal in the region matched these proportions, not even close. Russell returned to base camp first, visibly shaken. He didn't speak until Bryce turned the monitor toward him. When he saw the paused frame, an enormous silhouette paused mid-step. Russell exhaled hard and whispered, "That's not a bear." It wasn't fear in his voice. It was recognition, like a tracker finally confirming the creature behind the prints he'd followed for years. Mireya arrived moments later, and her reaction was even more telling. She leaned in, studying the limb placement, posture, and gait. Her background in primate behavior made the image more disturbing. The figure moved like an ape, but none existed in North America. Not at this size, and not in this terrain. Then they played the audio. A low-frequency rumble, barely audible to human ears, vibrated beneath the footage. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't wind. It was rhythmic, almost like a sub-harmonic vocalization. Mireya's expression changed immediately. Certain primates communicate using low infrasound to assert dominance or signal territorial claims. If this creature was doing the same, it meant one thing. It knew the team was there. The crew's internal chat lit up as the drone operator sent a message. "Look at the eyes." Bryce hesitated, but zoomed further. When the figure briefly turned its head, 2 small reflective points flashed back at the camera, positioned further apart than any known mammal. This wasn't normal red-eye reflection. It was something else entirely, something suggesting binocular vision designed for tracking. The final moment sealed it. As the figure stepped behind the trees, the thermal signature didn't fade. It burst, as if the creature's body temperature spiked, or it exerted sudden force. The reading jumped faster than any natural animal response. For the first time in the show's history, the crew wasn't debating possibilities. They were staring at evidence that should not exist. With the footage confirmed as authentic, the team made the rare decision to pursue in real time. Normally, any clear sighting forced an immediate strategic retreat, but this was different. If they hesitated, the creature would vanish, leaving nothing but another unsolved mystery. Bryce directed Russell and Mireya to move in carefully from opposite angles, hoping to triangulate the creature's path while avoiding direct confrontation. Every step they took was measured, deliberate, and painfully slow. The forest responded almost instantly. As Russell advanced, the underbrush shifted, not violently, but with a rhythm that suggested something large pacing parallel to him. Every time he stopped, the movement stopped as well. Every time he stepped forward, the unseen presence resumed. It was mirroring him, tracking him. The realization tightened his chest, but he pressed on, whispering updates into his mic. Mireya, on a lower slope, reported something equally disturbing. 3 stones landing near her feet, one after another, tossed from an unseen position deeper in the woods. None were thrown with force. They simply dropped into the brush, as if meant as a signal rather than a threat. Primates sometimes use this behavior to warn intruders. The seismic sensors spiked again, this time with a different pattern. Instead of heavy, deliberate steps, the readings now showed short bursts of movement, almost like something darting across the forest floor with unnatural speed. Bryce watched the data scroll across his screen and realized something chilling. The creature wasn't retreating. It was circling, studying the team as they attempted to approach. Thermal scans from the drone overhead confirmed this. Instead of heading away from the investigators, the heat signature looped around the ridge and reappeared behind Russell, close enough that the drone detected direct body heat through the canopy. Russell didn't hear a sound, didn't feel a breath, didn't sense a presence. But the drone operator insisted. Something massive stood in the shadows behind him for nearly 5 seconds before vanishing again. Mireya's situation escalated even faster. Her audio equipment picked up a vocalization, deep, resonant, almost like a throated hum. The sound vibrated through her chest rather than her ears. A frequency felt more than heard. Animals don't vocalize like this, not in the Cascades, not anywhere near this pitch. As she whispered into her mic that she was backing out, her voice shook for the first time in her career. The creature wasn't fleeing from them. It was herding them, studying their moves, guiding their path, and demonstrating intelligence far beyond any known primate. As the creature continued circling the team, Bryce ordered the drone to pull back and widen its radius. The hope was to capture a full-body thermal outline, something clear enough to compare against known species. What the drone recorded instead made Bryce's stomach drop. The heat signature wasn't just large, it fluctuated in a way no animal should. The torso glowed brighter than the limbs, as if the creature's core temperature surged with adrenaline or intention. This wasn't a stable biological pattern. It looked more like controlled bursts of energy. Russell, still moving along the ridge, spotted something unusual ahead. A tree, thick, mature, solid, began to sway, even though no wind was present. The movement wasn't random. It rocked once, twice, and then bent sharply, like something massive had gripped it. Russell raised his thermal monocular and saw a shape behind the trunk, a tall, upright form leaning against it, partially hidden. The upper body was unmistakable, shoulders that sloped forward, a head that darted slightly, as if checking multiple angles. What happened next was caught by both Russell's camera and the drone above. The creature stepped out, fully, deliberately, into an open patch of forest, illuminated by moonlight. For the first time in Expedition Bigfoot history, the team captured a full, unobstructed silhouette, broad chest, long arms, and a posture too human to be dismissed as an animal. But there was something worse. It stood still, unmoving, as if intentionally presenting itself. It didn't look startled or threatened. It looked aware, observant, almost curious. Then the eyes reflected again, not with the dull glow of typical nighttime eye shine, but with a sharp, almost metallic glint. 2 points of light fixed directly on Russell. The camera jittered as Russell instinctively stumbled back. The creature responded instantly. It tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement, like a predator assessing whether the human in front of it was a threat. The mic on Russell's vest picked up his breathing, rapid and uneven. He whispered that the creature was testing boundaries. Before he could finish the sentence, the figure moved, not with the heavy stomping of a bear, nor the bounding leaps of a deer. It glided, a smooth, controlled motion that covered distance too quickly for its size. In 3 strides, it was out of sight, but the terror didn't end there. As Russell tried to regroup, a loud crack echoed behind him, the unmistakable sound of something snapping a branch thicker than a human forearm. It wasn't a random break. It was a warning, a message, a demonstration of strength. The footage captured everything, and for the first time, the team realized the creature wasn't just avoiding contact. It was managing the encounter, deciding how close the humans could get. Russell's warning crack still echoed when Bryce issued a direct order: fall back to the rendezvous point immediately. The team had enough evidence to review, and the creature's behavior was growing unpredictable. But the forest had other plans. As Russell and Mireya began withdrawing, the seismic sensors triggered again, this time in rapid succession, forming a pattern that mimicked pursuit. Heavy impacts, fast impacts. Something was moving parallel to them, matching their retreat pace. Step for step, Mireya radioed that she could hear breathing. Not her own, not an echo, but a low, guttural exhale coming from the darkness beside the trail. Every time she stopped, it stopped. Every time she moved, it resumed. The audio equipment strapped to her pack captured the sound clearly. It wasn't the breath of a bear or elk. It was too steady, too controlled, and filled with an unmistakable presence of intent. Back at base, Bryce stared at the live drone feed with growing unease. The thermal signature reappeared behind the crew, just 60 yards back, partially obscured by trees. The creature wasn't fleeing anymore. It was shadowing them, tracking their movements with unnerving precision. The drone operator tried to spotlight the figure, but every attempt failed. The creature dipped into coverage the instant the drone adjusted, as if it understood the angles, the blind spots, the limitations of the equipment. Russell whispered that he could feel the ground tremble beside him, not shaking, pulsing, like something massive stepped softly but powerfully in the soil. Then came the moment that rattled the entire team. A rock the size of a baseball arced through the darkness and landed mere feet from Russell's position. This wasn't a stumble or dislodged debris. It was a throw, calculated, accurate, and forceful enough to send a clear message. Bryce called for an emergency extraction route, but the creature's behavior escalated. The thermal feed showed it moving in short bursts, fast, strategic, almost tactical. It would rush forward 30 feet, stop completely, then reposition again. Predators do this when driving prey. The fear shifted into something colder. The creature wasn't reacting to them. It was controlling their path. As the team approached a narrow canyon that led back to camp, the drone captured a moment that made Bryce's voice crack through the radio. The creature stepped into view again, this time at the canyon mouth, blocking the exit for a split second before vanishing into shadow. It wasn't an accident. It was a test, a demonstration of dominance. The message was unmistakable. This is my territory. You leave when I decide. The crew had stumbled into a chase, neither side fully initiated, but one, the creature, fully controlled. When the team finally made it back to camp, shaken and breathless, Bryce immediately ordered the footage uploaded to the command system for a full-frame analysis. This was standard protocol after any major sighting, but within minutes, it became clear that nothing about this night was going to be standard. The moment the clip stabilized on the screen, every person in the room went silent. The figure wasn't just visible. It was defined with musculature, posture, and movement that could not be dismissed as misidentification. The first step was running the video through a motion enhancement algorithm, something typically used to sharpen fast-moving wildlife. But when the program attempted to track the creature's limb movement, the system glitched, dropping frames, redrawing outlines, struggling to classify the figure as anything biologically familiar. The algorithm's species identification function, meant to categorize animals by movement pattern, returned a result the team had never seen before. No match, unknown biped. The second analysis, thermal reconstruction, was even stranger. The creature's core temperature spiked during moments of stillness rather than exertion. This went against every known mammalian response. Bryce rewound the clip to the exact moment the creature tilted its head toward Russell. The thermal reading jumped dramatically, as if the creature's internal temperature responded to awareness or focus. Mireya suggested this could indicate a biological mechanism not yet documented, a way of regulating heat for speed or sensory advantage. Then came the part that made Bryce lean back in his chair, stunned. When he slowed the footage to 1/10 speed, something subtle but unmistakable emerged. The creature's facial shape. The outline showed a pronounced brow ridge, sloped forehead, and a jawline too elongated for a human. But the most disturbing detail was its mouth. As Russell stumbled and gasped, the creature's lips moved, not in a snarl, not in a roar, but in a small, controlled motion that looked almost like mimicry, as if it were imitating the sound of human breathing. The audio track confirmed this. Under Russell's mic feed, buried beneath the forest noise, was a faint exhale that matched his own rhythm, about half a second delayed. Not animalistic, not accidental, intentional, coordinated. The creature wasn't just following them, it was listening, responding, mirroring, a level of behavioral intelligence that pushed the situation into terrifying new territory. When Bryce isolated the eyes, enhancement filters picked up something reflective not caused by camera glare. A thin, wet sheen, similar to primate tapetum, but positioned differently. The spacing was wider than a gorilla's, but narrower than a moose's. It suggested stereoscopic depth perception, identical to apex predators. The more they slowed the footage, the clearer one conclusion became. This creature wasn't just avoiding detection, it was studying the team, perhaps even assessing them. And for the first time in the show's history, the biggest fear wasn't that they had captured Bigfoot on camera, but that Bigfoot now understood the crew's methods as well. While Bryce and the tech team analyzed the footage frame by frame, Russell and Mireya stepped outside the command unit to collect themselves. The night was still unnaturally quiet, as if the forest had not yet recovered from whatever presence had moved through it. Russell kept glancing toward the tree line, replaying the creature's head tilt in his mind. There was something calculated in that gesture, something that suggested not just awareness, but intention. Mireya, normally the voice of scientific grounding, admitted in a low voice that the creature's behavior matched advanced primate strategies used only when observing another intelligent group. "It wasn't escaping," she whispered. "It was evaluating us." Inside the command unit, the drone operator called Bryce over with shaky urgency. He had gone back through raw drone telemetry, data that wasn't part of the video feed but recorded automatically. As he overlaid the movement logs, a chilling pattern emerged. The creature had been tracking the entire team long before anyone realized, not from one direction, but from 3 separate points throughout the night. It had moved in arcs, repositioning itself strategically around the investigators, like a tactician, like a hunter that understood perimeter control. Mireya rushed back inside as Bryce projected the creature's movement paths onto a digital map. The lines traced along ridges, dips, and natural cover points, routes used by predators who understand terrain advantage. But the creature had also paused at unusual intervals, stopping at elevated positions with clear sightlines toward the team's flashlights and gear. These pauses weren't random. They were observation posts. The creature had been watching them closer and longer than anyone realized. Then came the most unsettling discovery. When the team synced the seismic sensor timestamps with the drone footage, they realized the creature manipulated its weight to control what the sensors detected. During pursuit, it moved heavily. During observation, it moved lightly, sometimes registering no impact at all. This wasn't instinct. It was adjustment, control, conscious alteration of pressure to minimize detection. No known animal performs this behavior, but military personnel do. Experienced hunters do. This creature understood more than movement. It understood stealth. The realization rippled through the room. They were not tracking it. It had been tracking them the entire night. As the crew debated their next steps, a sudden audio ping interrupted the panic. One of the remote microphones, left near the ridge, picked up a deep, resonant vocalization. Not a growl, not a roar. A long, low harmonic pulse that vibrated through the equipment. The pitch matched the subharmonic tones recorded earlier, but this time, it carried a different pattern. 3 pulses. Pause. 2 pulses. Another pause. Almost like a signal. Almost like communication. And as the audio repeated, a cold truth settled in the room. The creature wasn't just reacting to the team. It was sending a message back. As the harmonic pulses echoed through the speakers, the entire command unit froze. The sound wasn't random. It followed structure, timing, spacing, and modulation too deliberate to be an accident. Bryce ordered an immediate comparison against known animal calls, but the database returned the same result the motion algorithm had earlier. No match. Unknown source. Mireya listened closely, then offered a chilling thought. Some primates use patterned vocal signals not to warn, but to coordinate. If the pulses were communication, then the creature wasn't alone. Before that idea could settle, the ridge microphone captured something else. Movement. Not one source, but 2, then 3. Heavy impacts spaced across different points of the forest, forming a semicircle around the abandoned sensor site. The creature they filmed might have been the one that revealed itself, but it wasn't the only one present. The realization hit with a weight none of the crew expected. The figure captured on camera seemed almost like a scout, not the dominant presence. a tester, an observer, and whatever sent the harmonic pulse might have been answering it. When the drone operator reviewed the final 10 minutes of thermal footage, he found a frame that made him step back from the monitor. There was a second heat signature, smaller but distinctly upright, watching from higher ground. It never moved, never approached. It simply stood still, observing everything below. Bryce immediately flagged the footage as highly sensitive. This was the moment the network would later refuse to air. The final blow came when the Ridge microphone recorded one last vocalization, a low, rising hum that matched the earlier pattern, but with a new pulse at the end, a fourth tone. Mireya's voice trembled as she translated the implication. The pattern had changed because the situation had changed. The creature now knew it had been filmed. Bryce shut down the equipment and ordered everyone back inside camp. For the first time in the show's history, the crew agreed without argument. The night wasn't just a breakthrough, it was a warning. As the footage was sealed for review, one thought echoed through every investigator's mind. If this was the creature willing to be seen, what were the ones still hiding capable of? Bryce Johnson has finally broken his silence. After years of rumors, denials, and theories about why he suddenly walked away from Expedition Bigfoot, he has revealed the real reason, and it's far more terrifying than anyone imagined. This wasn't about contracts, creative differences, or burnout. Bryce left because of a single night in the woods that changed everything. A night the network never aired. A night he still refuses to fully describe. Subscribe, because what Bryce just admitted will completely reshape how you see his final season. In the days leading up to Bryce Johnson's sudden and mysterious departure from Expedition Bigfoot, something about him had noticeably shifted. Crew members who had worked with him for years said he carried himself differently, more alert, more guarded, and far quieter than usual. Bryce was known for being enthusiastic, curious, and level-headed, but during this last stretch of filming, he appeared constantly distracted, as if listening for something just beyond the edge of human hearing. He started keeping a notebook on him at all times, jotting things down that no one else saw or heard. At first, the others thought he was refining theories or documenting details for the show. But as the days went on, he clutched that notebook like it was a warning label written only for him. He'd snap it shut the moment anyone got close enough to read the page. Crew footage from this period shows Bryce repeatedly scanning the tree line behind the team, sometimes stopping mid-sentence as if he sensed movement. He brushed off questions with vague answers, just listening, or thought I saw something. But privately, he confided in one producer that he felt they were being tracked, and that the pattern of activity around them didn't match the usual behavior of wildlife. He claimed something was circling their campsite at night, slowly, deliberately, never breaking branches, never leaving obvious signs, yet always close enough for him to feel its presence. Most people chalked it up to stress. They had been filming in one of the most remote and unforgiving regions they had ever explored. Everyone was exhausted. But Bryce's behavior wasn't simple fatigue. He stopped sleeping through the night, waking up drenched in sweat after hearing footsteps outside his tent that no one else seemed to notice. He asked to change tents 3 times in a single week, convinced that something was choosing specific locations within camp to approach. A tension grew in his voice during interviews, a subtle tremor that viewers would never see in the polished episodes. Behind the scenes, however, it was becoming increasingly obvious. Bryce wasn't just unsettled, he was scared. Not of an animal, not of a myth, but of something that felt intelligent, intentional. During one of the last nights he ever filmed, Bryce pulled one of the audio techs aside and whispered, "It's getting bolder. Whatever it is, it knows we're here for it." That was the first time he admitted out loud that he believed something in the woods wasn't just reacting to their presence, it was studying them. This growing dread, quiet but unmistakable, was the beginning of the end. And at this point, no one could have predicted how much worse it was about to get. The area they were investigating that week wasn't just another patch of forest. It was a place local rangers avoided, a place not listed on public trail maps, and a place the crew only chose after their data analyst noticed a disturbing trend. Multiple heat signatures appearing and disappearing in the exact same grid over several seasons. Every time they returned, the signatures changed position, almost as if something was watching their patterns and adjusting accordingly. From the moment Bryce stepped into that valley, something in him tightened. He later admitted that the air felt wrong, describing it as heavy, charged, and unnaturally still. Even the trees looked different, older, moss-choked, and arranged in a way that made the forest feel like it was funneling the team inward. One cameraman remarked, "It felt less like hiking and more like being escorted." On the first night, the motion sensors they set up around camp began activating in a repeating pattern, first on the north side, then east, then south, then west, a perfect square. Bryce was the first to understand the implication. Nothing moves in that geometric sequence unless it's moving intentionally, or unless multiple beings are coordinating. But it wasn't just the motion tech. Their drone footage kept glitching when flying over a particular cluster of trees. Not crashing, glitching, freezing for a split second, then resuming as if something had interrupted the signal. They reviewed the feed frame by frame and found brief flashes, white, elongated shapes darting between shadows. Bryce refused to call them animals. Even the soundscape changed. On their second day, the forest became so quiet that Bryce stopped walking. He looked around at the team and whispered, "This isn't nature. Something's controlling this." A veteran researcher on the crew agreed, saying he felt watched, not by eyes, but by intention. Night came fast in that valley, with the sun dropping behind the ridgeline like it was being pulled down. Bryce grew visibly anxious. He kept repositioning the cameras, adjusting angles, wanting overlapping coverage in case something comes from above. That comment unsettled the crew. Above? What did Bryce know, or think he knew, that they didn't? In an off-camera moment, he told a producer there had been reports going back decades of a creature in that valley that didn't behave like the others. It didn't leave tracks. It didn't vocalize normally. And past witnesses described it not as a large upright figure, but as something that could change its posture and movement, depending on whether it was walking, crawling, or climbing. The same producer later revealed that Bryce had asked privately if they could move the investigation to another location. When told they couldn't, Bryce went silent, staring into the trees before whispering, "Then we're exactly where it wants us." This valley wasn't just another hotspot. It was a funnel, a trap, and Bryce felt it tightening around them with every passing hour. The incident that finally broke him was coming, and the forest was already preparing for it. It happened just after midnight, so suddenly, so unnaturally, that the entire Expedition Bigfoot crew froze where they stood. One moment, the forest was alive with the usual nocturnal sounds, and the next, everything died at once. No insects, no owls, no rustling leaves, not even wind. It was as if the entire valley had been muted by an invisible switch. Bryce later said the silence felt manufactured, too perfect, too immediate, too absolute to be natural. The crew's audio equipment confirmed it. The waveforms didn't fade out gradually like normal ambient noise. They flatlined in an instant. Something had imposed silence over the entire ridge. Seconds later, the thermal cameras began malfunctioning. First one, then another. Screens filled with static, then flashed bursts of heat signatures shaped like distorted humanoids, tall, narrow, flickering in and out, as though phasing through trees. Bryce leaned toward the monitor, whispering, "Those aren't animals. Look at the way they move." The shapes didn't walk, they glided. Then Bryce felt a sudden pressure behind him. Not physical contact, but a force, a presence, as if something large was standing inches away, exhaling without sound. He spun around, expecting to see a crew member. There was no one there, but the feeling didn't stop. It followed him, staying just out of sight, like a shadow refusing to be caught. The silence grew oppressive, pressing against their ears so heavily that several team members described feeling nauseous. One cameraman whispered that he felt inside a vacuum, unable to tell where the sounds should be coming from. Even their breathing sounded muffled. Then their radios dropped to static. No interference, no distance issue, just a wall of static, thick, consuming, intentional. Bryce's flashlight dimmed, flickered, then steadied. Another light went out entirely. The team stood shoulder to shoulder, barely speaking, until Bryce finally said in a shaking voice, "Something is here with us, and it doesn't want us hearing anything else." In that moment, Bryce wasn't worried about Bigfoot. He realized they were dealing with something else entirely, something intelligent enough to manipulate the environment itself. The silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something that wanted them afraid. The silence had already stretched too long when Bryce heard it, a scream so sharp and human-sounding that it shot through the trees like a blade. It echoed across the ridge, high-pitched, panicked, unmistakably a cry for help. Bryce froze mid-step. It sounded like a woman, desperate, terrified, shouting words he couldn't quite make out. The crew instantly snapped into search mode, but Bryce didn't move. Something about the scream was wrong. It repeated. Same pitch, same tone, same length. Identical. Not similar. Identical. And as soon as the audio tech replayed the clip, Bryce's face drained of color. The waveform wasn't natural. Human screams fluctuate, tremble, break. This one was perfectly consistent, like something copying a sound it didn't fully understand. When they isolated the audio later, they discovered something worse. There was a faint doubling underneath the scream, a second layer shifting pitch too quickly, bending in ways no human throat could. An animal? No. A mechanical glitch? Impossible. Every recorder captured the same unnatural modulation. Someone, or something, was imitating distress. The scream came again, this time closer. Too close. It didn't move through the forest like a running person. It appeared closer, as if the source had instantly changed locations. One crew member whispered, "It's pulling us away from camp." Bryce knew it, too. His hands shook as he radioed the others, voice cracking. "Nobody goes toward that. Nobody." But the manipulation wasn't over. A third scream erupted, this one sounding like a child crying. Bryce stepped back instinctively, shaking his head, whispering, "It's learning. It's trying different voices." Producers later admitted the raw audio was so disturbing, they refused to include it in any episode. Not because it was graphic, but because it sounded like something practicing how to sound human. That was the night Bryce told the crew, off camera, "Whatever's in these woods isn't trying to scare us. It's trying to separate us." And the worst part? The screams stopped instantly when Bryce refused to go near them, as if the thing realized he wasn't falling for it. The night had already pushed Bryce to his limit, but what happened next is the moment he later admitted broke something in me. After the mimic screams died out, the crew attempted to regroup and reposition their cameras. Bryce stepped just a few feet beyond the firelight to scan the dark ridge when he suddenly froze. There, between two pine trunks, stood a figure. At first it looked like a tall silhouette, humanoid, upright, impossibly still. No sway, no shift of weight, no visible breathing. Just a dark mass shaped like a person, but too thin, too elongated, its limbs unnaturally straight, like something imitating human posture rather than naturally holding it. Bryce lifted his flashlight with a trembling hand. The beam struck the trees, the brush, the air around the figure. But the figure itself reflected no light. It was as if the light bent around it. Then it moved, not by stepping, not by turning, but by tilting, shifting its entire body angle in a smooth, fluid motion like a creature deciding which form to wear. Bryce took several steps back, whispering into his radio that someone, or something, was watching them. The radio only returned static. A cameraman saw Bryce's expression and followed his gaze, but by the time he turned his lens, the figure simply wasn't there anymore. No sound, no rustling, no retreat. One moment present, the next gone. But the thermal camera caught a flash, just one frame of something tall and narrow, retreating up the ridge at a speed no human could match. Bryce's breathing turned shallow. His hands shook so violently he had to steady them against a tree. He later admitted that for the first time in his career, he felt the fear wasn't coming from him, it was being fed into him. A directed pressure, as if the creature wanted him frozen, wanted him vulnerable. When the team regrouped, Bryce could barely speak. One producer said his face looked like he'd seen a ghost, but worse, like he'd seen something trying to become one. That was the moment Bryce realized they weren't being observed, they were being studied, and whatever was in the tree line knew exactly who Bryce was, and that he had seen it. The next morning, the forest looked normal again, sunlight filtering through the trees, birds calling in the distance, the illusion of safety restored. But Bryce knew better. He barely slept. slept, jerking awake at every snap of a twig. As dawn broke, one of the crew members called him over with a shaky voice. "You need to see this." Just beyond the edge of camp, embedded deep in the soft soil, were footprints, huge footprints, not the scattered, wandering tracks of a passing animal, but a pattern, circling the camp in a deliberate, tightening spiral. The prints were nearly 18 inches long, spaced far apart, suggesting something extremely tall or extremely efficient in its movement. But the worst part wasn't the size, it was the positions. Every footprint faced inward, toward the tents. Bryce's tent had been singled out. Directly outside it were 3 prints, closer, deeper, spaced tightly together, as if something had stood there for an extended period of time, watching. The soil showed no drag marks, no approach, no retreat. Whatever made those prints arrived and vanished without leaving any trace of movement. A biologist on the crew examined the impressions and whispered, almost reluctantly, "This isn't consistent with any known primate. Something this heavy would have left signs of walking." But it didn't. It just appeared here. Thermal cameras from the night before were reviewed. Nothing. Motion sensors? No alerts? Audio recorders? Silence. Something massive had walked right into the heart of their camp, stood inches from Bryce's sleeping body, and left without triggering a single device. When Bryce heard this, he went pale. He stepped back from the prints, shaking his head repeatedly. "It knew which tent was mine," he whispered. Not a tent, not the camp. His tent. That realization broke him more than any scream or shadow ever could. This wasn't random wildlife behavior. This wasn't coincidence. Something in those woods had intelligence, awareness, and purpose. And it had chosen Bryce, specifically. Later, Bryce admitted that the moment he saw those footprints, he felt something deep, instinctual, and absolute. Whatever was out there had already decided it wanted him. This was the moment Bryce says he knew he had to leave the show. Not because of fear, he'd faced fear countless times, but because what happened that night felt personal, as if whatever was in the woods had shifted its focus entirely onto him. It happened just after 3 a.m. The camp was asleep, the fire reduced to embers. Bryce lay in his sleeping bag, fully awake, staring at the ceiling of his tent. He hadn't slept at all, not after seeing the footprints. The forest had returned to its unnatural stillness, the kind of silence that felt constructed, like the environment itself was holding its breath. Then he heard it, a slow, heavy exhale, inches from his head, not outside the tent, against the tent wall. The fabric distended slightly, as if something enormous was leaning into it, breathing through it. Bryce's heart slammed into his chest. He held his breath, hoping it was just wind, but the exhale came again, and this time he heard the subtle rattle at the end of the breath, like vocal cords not fully formed trying to mimic human breathing. He whispered into his radio, "Something's outside my tent." Only static answered. The creature exhaled a third time. This one was deeper, an almost curious sound, like it was testing him. Bryce felt warmth spreading from panic. His entire body tensed. He didn't dare move. He didn't dare speak again. He could feel the weight of something large shifting its stance directly on the other side of the thin nylon. Then came the sound that haunts him the most, a low, deliberate sniff, dragging across the base of his tent. Not searching, recognizing. Bryce later said it felt like the creature was verifying that he was awake. Suddenly, the breathing stopped. No footsteps followed. Instead, there was a soft sliding sound, as if the thing didn't walk away, but moved without lifting its weight, gliding around the tent in a slow, circling motion. When a nearby crew member finally stirred and unzipped his tent, footsteps approached Bryce's camp, and only then did the presence retreat, not crashing through brush, not breaking branches, just dissolving into the dark. Bryce crawled out of his tent, pale and shaking. His voice cracked when he whispered to the cameraman, "It was waiting for me to be alone." That night broke whatever resolve he had left. The forest wasn't just dangerous. It was aware, and it was learning him. By the next morning, Bryce Johnson was no longer the same investigator who had entered the woods days earlier. Crew members described him as withdrawn, trembling, flinching at every unexpected sound. He barely spoke during breakfast, staring into the tree line as if expecting something to emerge at any moment. When producers asked if he was ready to continue filming, Bryce shook his head slowly and said, "It's not hunting Bigfoot, it's hunting me." The producers initially assumed exhaustion. Long days, sleepless nights, and intense tension had taken a toll on everyone. But then Bryce pulled them aside and showed them something no one else had seen. A page from his notebook filled with timestamps and descriptions of sounds, impressions, and moments where he felt the presence closing in. He highlighted several entries and said, "These weren't coincidences. It was tracking me on purpose." Later, when reviewing the campsite audio from the night before, sound engineers discovered something chilling. During the exact minutes Bryce heard breathing outside his tent, the surrounding microphones captured nothing. Total dead air. As if the forest itself muted to hide whatever was standing next to him. Sound suppression that precise was impossible by natural means, and everyone knew it. That was the breaking point. Bryce told producers he couldn't stay. Not one more night, not one more hour. This wasn't about the show anymore. This was survival. He said he felt a presence attached to him, following him specifically, reacting only when he was alone. His fear wasn't dramatic or panic. It was quiet, controlled, the kind of fear that sits deep in the bones. When he announced he was leaving, no one argued. He packed his gear before sunset. A security escort walked him out of the valley. One cameraman privately admitted he felt relieved to see Bryce go because the atmosphere around Bryce had become suffocating, like a storm cloud that only hovered over one person. For years, Bryce stayed silent about the real reason he left Expedition Bigfoot. The official narrative was that he took a break for personal reasons, but he recently revealed the truth in a private interview. "I didn't leave the show, I left the creature." He said that what they encountered in that valley wasn't Bigfoot, at least not in the way people think. It wasn't just a physical being, it was an intelligence, a presence capable of strategy, mimicry, environmental manipulation, and psychological targeting. Bryce admitted he feared it could follow him home if he stayed any longer. The interviewer asked him what he believed the creature wanted. Bryce looked down, took a long breath, and said, "It wanted me alone, and it almost got what it wanted." That was his final answer, and for the first time, fans finally understood. Bryce Johnson didn't quit the show. He escaped something he believed would have taken him if he stayed. Bryce Johnson from Expedition Bigfoot is breaking the news, and what he captured has stopped even the most skeptical scientists in their tracks. For years, we've heard reports from hunters, loggers, and hikers, but what was recorded deep in the Washington Cascades may finally prove that the legendary creature is real. Stay with me, because what Bryce discovered isn't just a figure in the trees. It's moving, it's breathing, and experts say it changes everything. Subscribe now before we continue. Bryce Johnson didn't join Expedition Bigfoot to chase fantasy. He joined to help prove, once and for all, whether there was any truth to one of America's oldest wilderness legends. As a seasoned host and field investigator, he treated each expedition like a scientific pursuit, structured, methodical, and based in reality. But what began as another meticulously planned multi-week survey in the remote Cascades quickly became something else entirely. Even before departure, something felt different. The region they were targeting wasn't just selected for sightings. It was chosen because new AI mapping software pulled decades of reports, acoustic anomalies, unexplained heat signatures, and tribal warning zones into a single overlap. On the map, it formed a distinctive red triangle, a location that, statistically, should have been impossible. The team expected elevated findings, maybe vocalizations, maybe track impressions, but Bryce felt an unease even before they set foot on the ground. Local guides refused to cross beyond a certain ridge, saying it was a place where the forest watches you. The remark was dismissed as folklore, until the crew noticed wildlife vanishing the deeper they went. Birdsong stopped. Even insects faded into silence. Bryce later described it as if the woods were holding their breath. The first 3 days went according to plan. Thermal scans, trail grid sweeps, flask sampling at stream beds, all standard. But on the fourth night, something shifted. Just past 2 a.m., An infrasound event rippled through camp. Gear elevated off surfaces by fractions of an inch. Cameras reset on their own. Bryce sat up in his tent, feeling the air pressure collapse, like standing under deep ocean water. He wasn't afraid yet. He thought it was seismic, but the sensors showed no geological activity. Instead, the pressure wave came from within the forest, in a direction where no wind was moving. That was the moment Bryce wrote 2 words in his field notebook: "It knows." The expedition team had one advantage no past Bigfoot search ever truly possessed: technology built to detect what human senses could not. For Season X, production approved a custom-built sensor array designed by a former aerospace engineer. It combined thermal imaging, long-range LiDAR, low-light adaptive optics, and directional infrasound monitors capable of mapping pressure waves in real time. Bryce Johnson was the first to insist on testing it in the field. He believed emotional bias could be removed if whatever they encountered was captured through tools instead of fear. What happened next proved his belief right and changed it forever. Late in the afternoon on day 5, the sensor tower placed along the ridge of the valley began showing irregular heat bursts approximately 8 feet off the ground. Not animal level, not human. The software estimated the heat mass at over 350 pounds, yet fully vertical, moving with deliberate restraint between trees. Bryce called for a manual verification. A drone equipped with thermal cameras launched silently above the canopy. The feed returned a figure: solid, heat-based, symmetrical. At first glance, it looked like a man, too large, too fluid, walking with a gait both heavy and unnervingly quiet. The software flagged something unexpected: stride length exceeding 52 inches. No human alive has a natural walking stride that long, especially not at that height. Then came the part that silenced the room. The AI refused to classify it as any known animal species. The system displayed a warning Bryce had never seen during an investigation: unknown biological entity, humanoid structure. Still skeptical, Bryce requested a second sensor confirmation, this time using LiDAR to test depth and shape. The scan returned surface contours: broad chest, defined shoulder roll, elongated forearms. The motion analysis showed no light compensation. Whatever was being tracked was not reflecting light. It was absorbing it. "That's when I felt it," Bryce later said. "The moment technology stopped protecting me from what my eyes didn't want to see." He kept watching the screen. The figure turned toward the drone and briefly, unmistakably, seemed to look back. Before Bryce captured the footage that now dominates scientific debate, the forest had already been communicating, just not in ways people were willing to acknowledge. It started with the trees. On the morning of day 6, the team found fresh twists in saplings along a ravine line. Not broken, not cut, twisted. A full rotation at the base, still rooted in the ground. It would take hundreds of pounds of controlled force to do that without snapping them. Local search and rescue teams later reported that similar tree manipulations had been documented during missing person searches, always in clusters, always along silent trails. Then came the rock formations, perfectly balanced stacks of 3, each stone weighing nearly 30 to 40 pounds, perched on elevated tree stumps 5 feet off the ground. No footprints around them, no drag marks. Bryce noted that they looked less like markers and more like warning, almost territorial, as if placed deliberately at eye level. By nightfall, vocal recordings added to the unease. The parabolic mics picked up a deep-toned resonance, too low for known animal calls, too structured for random noise. The sound signature appeared to mimic the cadence of human breathing, but scaled. The waveform showed long inhalation cycles, powerful exhalations, repeating roughly every 8 seconds. No known primate fits that pattern. Team members reported a sensation many describe in paranormal contexts, but rarely during biological encounters: being watched with intent. Even the crew's trained wildlife tracker, typically composed, admitted that several times he felt movement shadowing him from the tree line. Closely, intelligently, in sync with his steps, as though it was matching his rhythm. But the most unsettling sign came from their thermal perimeter alarm around 3:18 a.m. Something large moved just outside the detection border. Not fast, not frantic, casual, almost curious. A single camera, just one, captured what appeared to be a broad silhouette crouching behind a fallen log. It stayed motionless for 47 seconds before standing, rising, slowly. 2 frames were usable. In one, only the shape is visible. In the next, a patch of visible eye shine glints off the low nightlight. No glare from a flashlight, no artificial reflection. Eye shine at that height, that spacing, Bryce later said, did not match anything we're supposed to be tracking. The forest wasn't simply reacting, it was anticipating. By the time the team moved deeper into the ridge valley, everything in their surroundings felt slightly wrong. Bryce described it as if the forest's natural rhythm had stopped and something else had replaced it. Wildlife activity didn't vanish, it reorganized. No birds, yet the sound of branches shifting overhead, no small game, but movement, like a single set of heavy steps pacing parallel to their path. More disturbing still, insects continued their nighttime hum everywhere except directly behind the crew, where the air seemed unnaturally still and silent, trailing them like a moving vacuum. Late into day 7, technician Ben Walker detected electromagnetic fluctuations that pulsed in patterned intervals. Not random spikes, measured surges occurring exactly every 90 seconds. The readings spread over a quarter-mile radius, as if something was moving through multiple points and releasing energy. Bryce noted they aligned with elevation contours, almost like strategic positioning. The team later referred to this as the pulse grid and theorized something was mapping them. Then came the footprints, 18-inch impressions sunk deep into moss and loam. The stride measured over 6 feet from heel to heel, with no sag or drag between steps. Whatever made them walked with confidence and impeccable balance. The prints were fresh, and partially overlapping tire tracks left by their support vehicle less than 2 hours earlier. They weren't observing from a distance anymore. That night at camp, Bryce recalled hearing a low guttural sound, steady, rhythmic, almost like chanting carried through windless air. The words weren't clear, but the tone implied intention rather than instinct. It was followed by 3 tree knocks at precise intervals, easily 200 yards apart, triangulating their location. The team leader issued a silent retreat for night discipline. No lights, minimal movement. But 30 minutes later, the thermal cameras captured heat signatures closing in from 2 angles. Not sprinting, not stalking, approaching, upright, calculated. A tall figure paused just beyond sensor range for nearly 1 minute. Crew members later said that silence felt like an interrogation, as if whatever was there was studying them, not deciding whether to attack, but whether to allow them to remain. Bryce whispered to his mic, "It's not hiding from us anymore. It's waiting." And that's when he realized the moment they pressed forward would determine whether they captured evidence or became part of it. The next morning, Bryce reviewed the thermal recordings from the previous night. At first glance, the data looked corrupted. Frames skipping, pixel warping, heat signatures vanishing mid-motion. But when one clip was isolated, enhanced, and slowed frame by frame, the distortion cleared just long enough to reveal something that froze the entire command tent. There, between the silhouette of 2 cedar trunks, stood a tall figure, upright, broad-shouldered, with an elongated gait and clearly defined head-to-toe thermal mass. No fur blur, no anomalous heat bloom, just a fully articulated biped. The outline showed arms longer than human average, hands dangling beyond thigh level, and musculature that moved with slow, controlled breathing. Bryce later described it as not animal-like, but eerily deliberate, a living thing deciding how much of itself we were allowed to see. The recording captured exactly 4.6 seconds of exposure before the figure stepped behind a tree and vanished completely. No visible retreat, no detectable heat trail. The environment normalized immediately, as though whatever was there simply ceased occupying the space. Crew operators ran heat ladder calculations, temperature gradients that typically show residual thermal traces from moving organisms. Nothing. The ground where it stood showed no heat transfer. Forest density metrics indicated no disruption. It was as if the entity projected heat without interacting with its surroundings. What made this clip even more disturbing wasn't what they saw, but what followed. Exactly 5 seconds after disappearance, the audio sensors picked up a deep, sudden exhale directly behind Bryce's mobile mic, despite no visual presence at that location. Crew described it as a single breath, full, controlled, like someone testing how close they could get without being detected. At that moment, Bryce's heart rate spiked to 168 beats per minute. The team initiated a containment protocol for all electronic files. 3 separate backup drives were created, sealed, and placed in Faraday cases. But within minutes, 2 of the drives corrupted. Only 1 remained intact. Later that evening, meteorological logs indicated a sudden drop in localized air pressure, only in the immediate radius around camp. Microscopic spores were detected in the air samples, unknown to their environmental catalog. Lab analysis later classified them as originating from high-altitude pine species, over 60 miles away. Something had been close enough to leave biological traces. And just when the crew believed they had the breakthrough, they realized their investigation had crossed into something that chose when to be seen. Bryce said one chilling line that marked the turning point of the entire expedition. Maybe we didn't capture it. Maybe it allowed itself to be captured. From that moment on, they stopped asking if Bigfoot exists and started asking what it wanted from them. After the footage was secured, tension inside the expedition tent spiraled. Bryce noted that for the first time in the show's history, the team wasn't chasing something. They were reacting to it. What came next challenged not only what they believed about Bigfoot, but what they believed about consciousness itself. Around 2:17 a.m., as they reviewed sensor logs, the crew detected a single, low-frequency oscillation coming from the North Hillside. Too controlled to be wind, too steady to be animal. It was measured at 19 hertz, a frequency known as the fear resonance threshold, low enough to trigger unease in humans without being consciously audible. That didn't happen by accident. Tech specialist Ben ran the audio through spectral analysis. The waveform displayed evenly spaced modulations, almost linguistic in structure, not language, but patterned intention. It repeated 3 times, with the final surge peaking exactly when Bryce looked toward the forest edge on the external-facing camera, as if whatever was emitting it responded to his awareness. Moments later, seismic sensors picked up slight tremors, not a quake, impact pulses, 5 compressions, precisely 41 seconds apart. Later tests showed they aligned with the average time between the team's radio transmissions, almost as if something was syncing itself to their communication interval. Then came the most unsettling moment of the night. Bryce, visibly shaken on camera, reported a feeling of being watched from within the tree line. He described it as not an observer, an evaluator. The thermal rigs scanned that direction. Nothing appeared, but on playback, a transparent shift in pixel density spiked for 1 frame. A body-sized distortion moved through the air like heat mirage, even though ground temperature readings remained constant. At 2:24 a.m., every monitor inside the tent glitched simultaneously. Not static, a uniform gray flash, with a code-like sequence of vertical lines. Frame analysts later discovered the bars matched exactly the ratios of the earlier tree knock triangulation. Whatever was out there wasn't just reacting, it was responding. It was learning, and worst of all, it was beginning to initiate. One member of the crew quietly whispered off-camera, "We're not tracking it anymore. It's tracking our thoughts." They shut down camp protocols immediately. But deep down, Bryce knew that was only its first reply. The team expected activity to escalate physically, broken branches, rapid pursuit, maybe even vocalizations. But what unfolded challenged every known pattern of animal behavior. Because what came next wasn't a chase in the traditional sense, It was a choreographed response. At 2:28 a.m., Bryce stepped outside the tent with the body-mounted thermal rig. Film director Ronnie advised against it, but Bryce insisted, his words recorded as, "It's watching us adapt. We need to signal we're not afraid." The area was unnaturally calm. Wind readings dropped to 0. All wildlife audio, insects, tree birds, distant coyotes, cut out simultaneously. According to audio analytics, this loss of natural sound took place within exactly 1.4 seconds across a 100-yard perimeter. As if someone muted the forest, analyst Miriam later described. Then Bryce stopped, completely still. The infrared feed captured something the human eye couldn't see. A movement deep within the brush, almost like the air bending. But instead of aggressive advancement, it mirrored his posture. Bryce stepped forward. The distortion receded. He stepped back. It advanced. Each motion occurred with a 0.7-second delay, like an echo of intention. His pulse, measured through his vest monitors, spiked from 78 to 141 beats per minute in under 4 seconds. Then, the scorched branch. A fallen limb by Bryce's left side suddenly split with a crack, not from impact, but from pressure. No visible contact. The wood fibers peeled outward as if pushed by invisible force. Heat imaging detected a temperature rise around it, from 47 degrees Fahrenheit to 92 degrees Fahrenheit, without any external source. At the same moment, Bryce whispered, "It's trying to show me something." He later said those words didn't feel like his own. Suddenly, the forest gave back its sound, but now only one voice was heard, a single, guttural exhale, close but untraceable. Not animal, not human. Bryce's final words as he retreated were nearly inaudible on camera. "It knows what we're afraid of, and it doesn't have to chase us. It already has us where it wants." He returned to camp without ever being touched, because the encounter wasn't about distance. It was about proximity of thought. By dawn, the forest returned to normal. Birds resumed their calls, and the breeze rustled through tree crowns as if the previous night had never happened. But back at the command tent, when analysts began reviewing the thermal, audio, and biometric data, the illusion shattered. What the team captured didn't just prove that something was there, it suggested it was intentionally interacting with their technology. It started with the infrared rig Bryce wore. The system recorded standard forward POV until 2:29:41 a.m., when for precisely 5 frames, the image changed. It shifted from Bryce's perspective to an elevated angle looking down at him, as if someone or something was filming from above. The metadata didn't show a camera switch. No drone was in the air. Yet those frames clearly displayed Bryce, viewed from a position nearly 12 feet off the ground, standing completely alone. No crew, no visible source for the footage. This angle would require physical equipment, and yet the data identified the footage as originating from Bryce's own thermal device. Then came the audio anomaly. Hidden deep under the forest ambient track was a layered low-frequency pulse, repeating every 3.2 seconds from the moment Bryce stepped out alone. Audio specialist Miriam isolated it, enhanced the waveform, and described it as sounding like an exhale through water, followed by something clicking. Side-by-side comparisons to known wildlife returned no matches. But the most disturbing discovery came from Bryce's biometric data. 3 minutes before any visual anomaly appeared, his heart rate spiked. Not from fear, but from a sudden surge in dopamine and norepinephrine, consistent with someone staring directly at a threat. Yet, at that exact moment, Bryce said in his post-analysis review, he wasn't looking at anything. He described it as feeling watched by something that hadn't appeared yet. Layered over the thermal interference frames, analysts noticed subtle distortion resembling facial structure, elongated brow ridge, forward-set eyes, matching eyewitness sketches collected decades ago, only visible with thermal inversion, and only for half a second. The final note from the technical report reads, "The subject was not detected entering the frame. The frame was reoriented around the subject." In other words, the creature didn't step into view. It pulled the camera into its view. Bryce Johnson sat down to review the data one last time. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then, with his head lowered, he finally said what no one on the team wanted to admit. "That thing. It knew we were here. It wanted to be seen. It wasn't caught on camera. It caught us. He explained that what disturbed him most wasn't what he saw, but what he felt. The entity wasn't just an animal. It wasn't running from us. It was waiting, almost curious. Bryce concluded the team would never release the unedited footage. Not because it was unclear, but because it was too clear. He looked into the camera and whispered, "This wasn't evidence of Bigfoot. This was contact." And then he stood up, refusing to review it again.